coming at you this morning. By the way, good morning. If we haven't met yet, my name is Danny.
And my name is Eden. It's so good to see you here this morning.
We have so many announcements for you this morning that we're not even going to do any of them. How about this? Instead, what should I do?
Hey, we have the red card in front of you, which is a great way to get connected. That QR code right there also gets you to our fall happenings where you can find all the things.
I think they're going to be like on the screen right here. There's so many things going on in the fall that you do not want to miss out. And so with that, we're just going to have this one thing. Today, what's happening after service?
After service, we have our last baptism class before we head out to Green Lake next weekend for our baptism service.
Yes, so we'll see you at Green Lake next weekend. And with that, let's dive into service.
Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder. Thy power throughout the universe display. Sing it with me. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Whoa, hello, my name is Ripon. I'm pretty sure we have met every single day of your life. I'm the whisper inside, the one that you forget. Hello, my name is Defeat. I know you recognize me. Just when you think you can win, I'll drag you right back down again till you've lost all belief. Yeah, these are the voices. Yeah, these are the lies. And I have believed it for the very last time. Hello, my name is Child of the One True King. I've been saved, I've been changed, I have been set free. Amazing grace is the song I sing. Hello, my name is Child of the One True King. Whoa, 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 whoa. I am no longer defined by all the wreckage behind. The one who makes all things new has proven it's true. Take a look at my life. Hello, my name is Child of the One True King. I've been saved, I've been changed, I have been set free. Amazing grace is the song I sing. Hello, my name is Child of the One True King. Oh, 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 oh. What love the Father has lavished upon us that we could song I sing. Hello, my name is child of the one true King. Whoa, 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 whoa. I am a child of the one true King. Whoa,
Good morning. How's everybody feeling? All right, I can hear you singing with us. So excited. Welcome to Ripon Community Church. You know, my voice is a little hoarse today because we were practicing. We're getting ready for this concert we have on September 9th. And this is most of the band. We have some other members that are in the band that aren't here today, but we're just excited about this concert, and there's a couple songs we're going to do. We're going to mix some Christian songs with some other songs, and check out, let me know if you've heard this song before. Anybody heard that song? We're not doing it today. You have to wait. But why would we do a song like that? Well, we want to reach people that maybe are turned off by church or a little afraid of church. So we're going to do a bunch of really fun songs and some really good music. And I just ask that you would invite some people to come, especially someone who maybe is a little turned off by church or afraid of church, because we'd love to have them there, and maybe that moves them one step closer. So on this next song, we're going to do a song called Brighter Days. And Ari's going to lead us on that, so I encourage you to sing with us on this next song.
There's gonna be
Pray with me. Father, thank you for bringing us here this morning. You guided us here, guided us through worship. I pray that you will move through Pastor Sam this morning and his words, and help us to remember that all of our fears just go crashing down like Jericho when we trust on you. In your name we pray. Amen.
She wakes up. She wakes up and she's still groggy. Her eyes are barely even open. And as she lays in that bed, she wonders if maybe this morning it was all just a dream. So she takes her hand and she feels the bed next to her. Still empty. He'd been gone for 39 days. 39 days. She gets herself moving, gets out of the bed, rouses the kids. Got a lot to do today. Got a lot to do because he's not here and the chores have to get done and the water has to get fetched and the garden needs to get weeded and the house needs to be cleaned and that's actually really good. It's really good because it'll keep him busy. It's been 39 days, so every day that goes on, it just seems crazy. Normally when your husband goes off to war, in these days, it was a day or two. Battles didn't take long with swords. You just went out on the field and decided who won. And so it was odd, weird, confusing that it had been 39 days and he still wasn't home. As she does her chores for the day, she talks to some other people. There's more gossip in town. People are talking about how there's this man, this giant of a man, who walks out in front of the army, the Philistine army, and he says, "One of you come and challenge me. If you win, we'll be your slaves. If I win, you'll be ours." Those are the words that came haunting every single day in that valley where he walked out. And so here she is, only hearing rumors and wondering, when's it going to happen? She spends time with the kids, feeds them lunch, does the normal day's work, gets to the evening, they sit around the table, and it's at this point in the day where it's the most evident. The chair's empty. And as she holds hands with the kids and says the prayer that her husband normally says, they eat dinner together. As she hushes them off to bed, she takes a quick walk out to the outside of her home and looks up at the hillside, knowing that at some point, sometime, someday, coming over that hillside will be men. And either it will be her husband among those men and it will be so joyful, or it'll be the other guys. And she'll need to run with her children. We don't think about the bystanders of history very often, do we? The spectators of history. The people on the sidelines, they're sitting in the stands. And yet their lives are so deeply impacted by these notable people in history, these actions of others. They still have their hopes, they still have their dreams, but they depend so much on history's major players. Can you imagine being that woman Waking up every morning, wondering if this will be the day. Can you imagine being those kids and wondering when dad's coming home? Or if? And can you imagine the joy they must have felt when they saw their dad running over the hillside and not the others, and they knew they were safe? And when he gets there, he tells the story of this young boy who took a sling and a stone and whipped it, and it lodged directly in the middle of this Goliath's forehead, and he falls to the ground. Can you imagine how that day the man named David became a hero, a legend? We're in this series right now called Origin Stories. These stories that shape and define who we are. They shape and define our faith. History, it's told around campfires. It's formed around campfires. The other night I was with my son, and he was talking about or asking about like family history a little bit. Like just normal stuff, right? Like cousins or aunts or uncles or that sort of a thing. And it was just simple stuff, but it's fun to watch how we just want to know. You know, we just want to know. It does something in us if we know where we come from, that we know we come from somewhere, from some people. And it doesn't matter if it's inspiring or not. There's actually studies that say whether it's inspiring or not, people that know their family history actually are more likely to succeed. It's wild. Doesn't matter if it's inspiring or not. What matters is that we come from somewhere, from some people. History is formed around campfires or kitchen tables because that's where we recount stories. Good stories, true stories, always with a hero. And this story that we're talking about today, it's a true story, and it's a story that has a hero. But to understand it, we'll need to zoom in on history for a little bit, and then we'll need to zoom out on history for a little bit. The reason is because this story spans 42 chapters in the Bible, and if we were going to read it, it would take like 2 days. And I don't want to put you through that this morning. But the story is about this man named David. David and Goliath. Maybe you've heard of the guy. This guy that becomes a king, King David. And to set the scene, we got to give us a little bit of context here. How did we get here? How did we even get to the point where Israel had a king? Because for most of their history up until this point, they hadn't. God had chosen a single man, a single family named Abraham. And with Abraham, he had formed this nation, this big family group. And that group of people, that nation, goes into Egypt and they get really successful. They grow really big, and then the Egyptians get angry that they're big and scared of them, so they enslave them. And after years and years of slavery, God says, I'm going to rescue you. And so God sends in Moses. Moses comes in, he leads them out of slavery in Egypt. But Moses isn't a king. He's just a leader following God. And they get to the promised land, the land God had promised to them. Moses doesn't take them over. Joshua does. He's still not a king. He takes them over the river into this promised land. They take the promised land, but Joshua isn't a king, remember. They have their own tribes, these group of people that take this different big area of land that God had promised to them. Joshua dies, and then they have these judges, these people that basically say, hey, remember to follow God. Hey, you're messing up. Remember to follow God. Guys and girls that lead the Israelite people, but not as a king, pointing to God as their king. Until they get a judge named Samuel. And Samuel's a powerful dude. He's a powerful guy, and people are afraid of him, and that he's been leading the people really well. But the people say to Samuel, because they're looking around at everywhere else, and they say, hey, we need a king, Samuel. We need a king. Every other nation here has a king. We've got to have a king. And Samuel's like, you don't want a king. You don't understand. Kings are awful. Kings make you pay taxes. Kings take your kids and they enslave them. Kings are awful. You do not want to have a king. Yeah, but look at all the other nations. They have kings. We got to have a king, like a 5-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. They're saying we've got to have a king. And so finally, God relents. And even Samuel's like, no, we can't let them have it. But God says, no, give them what they want. Samuel chooses the first king named Saul. And to make a really long story really short, Saul messes up big time. So much so that God removes his blessing from Saul and takes it somewhere else. This is what it says in the Bible. It says, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, 'You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel. So fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king.'" This is pre-Goliath. So Samuel, he gets his stuff, he loads up, he heads to where David is, where Jesse is. And he goes to where Jesse is, and the people that are there in Bethlehem, they're frightened because when Samuel shows up, typically things aren't a good thing. Like you've messed up in some way, and he's there to punish you or tell you to figure things out. And so they're scared, but he says, "Don't worry, it's all fine. I've just come to offer a sacrifice with Jesse and his family." Goes to where Jesse is, and he says, "Jesse, I need you to line up all your sons. Bring them out here, line them up." And Samuel, he sees the first son, he's like, "Yes, that's the guy." Take a look at what it says. It says, "When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, 'Surely this is the Lord's anointed.' But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him.'" The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So one by one, all of Jesse's sons are lined up, and God says, "Nope, nope, 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 nope." Until finally all the sons are gone, like they're dismissed. They're not there anymore. And Samuel's like, "God, they're all gone. What's the deal? Like, what's happening? Jesse, where are all of your sons? These are all of your sons? Like, do you have another one, like, hidden somewhere?" And just like, "Yeah, I do." Like the runt of the litter. He's out, and he's out taking care of the flock, and I figured you wouldn't want him, so I just didn't bring him over here. And so Samuel says, "No, bring him here, and we're not going to sit down and eat until he's here." So David shows up, which, by the way, I'm just got to say, I'm a little offended. Like, I'm the youngest of three boys. We always get the underestimated thing, right? Like, it's a thing, but that's another story. Sorry, bring that in here. But here's what happens. I'll just read it. It says, "So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, 'This is the one. Anoint him.' So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah." Can you imagine being there? This big God, Samuel, this person you've heard stories about, shows up. And then he takes olive oil and he puts it on your brother or puts it on David. And all of a sudden, there's this powerful force that comes upon him. The power of God comes upon David in this strong way, and it's big and it's dramatic, this amazing moment. And then, nothing happens. Then they wait. He's not officially king yet. He's just chosen by God. Have you ever felt like you were called to go and do something, but then you had to wait for a really long time to actually do it? Like we're at the point where college kids are coming back to campus or heading off to campus somewhere. Like maybe you at one point got accepted into college and then it was agonizing because you had to wait so long until you actually could show up on campus. Or maybe you got accepted or hired for a job and you had to wait a few weeks before you could start. You said, "I just want to start now. Let's get this thing started." You had to wait. You make big plans. You're going to go on vacation, but you got to wait. Maybe you know God has something planned for you, but it needs to be in His timing, so you got to wait. Try being David. He's king. He's supposed to be king, but he's not king. Zoom out for a minute with me. David slowly has things begin to happen. Some people just have that thing about them, right, where everything they touch, it just succeeds. They win wherever they go. They rise through the ranks. They're beloved. That's David. God was powerful in David. David's even a musician, and so Saul had begun to have these like terrors because the power of the Lord had been removed from him, and it's just awful for him. And so whenever David would show up and play the harp for the king, the terrors would be eased. And so David finds himself doing that. In fact, as a quick side note, a huge amount of the Psalms are written by David, this book of songs that we sing, that we talk about, that we read through. It's David's own writing. So he goes there. David slays Goliath. He becomes a commander of armies of men. He's as successful as you get. He's just rocking it. But that is a double-edged sword. Not everyone loves a hero. In that day, there became this popular saying, this song that they would sing out. And it goes like this. Saul killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So can you imagine being Saul hearing that? Like he's walking through the courtyard and he overhears people singing and they're singing Saul has killed his thousands and his ego just bursts, right? Man, I'm feeling so good about myself. I'm killing the thousands. I'm leading these armies. I'm this massively powerful guy. But wait, what was that? What was that you said? David has killed his 10,000s? What? What is David? I'm the king. That's not right. How does that work? So needless to say, he gets angry, and even to the point where David, he's playing the harp, Saul grabs a spear and he lunges it at him. He tries to kill David. And David dodges out of the way, runs out, which begins this 20-chapter sequence of Saul trying to kill David. Just goes on and on and on, even to the point where Saul's own son, David's BFF, his best friend named Jonathan, basically helps David escape from death. So David is out on the run. And as he's out on the run, there's this group of men that begin to follow him. This is how they're described. It says, so David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Soon his brothers and all his other relatives joined him there. Then others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented, until David was the captain of about 400 men. Man, his mom must have been so proud. Just hanging out with those guys, right? Hanging out with the people that are discontented, in debt, in trouble. That's his crew. These are the guys that he's with. These are his men. And under David's leadership, what's crazy about this story is that these men become like the elite of the elite. They're the best fighting force around. They are incredible because of David's leadership. But they lived on the run because Saul spent all of his time trying to kill David. And there are these close calls. Close calls actually in the opposite direction. Saul's trying to kill David, but there are these moments where David could have very easily killed Saul. There's this one in the cave where David cuts the hem off of Saul's coat, and when he exits the cave, David's like, hey, I could have killed you. Can you stop chasing me? And he does for a while. But then he keeps on chasing him. And there's this moment when David sees Saul and his army camped out. They're chasing after him, and they see that they're all asleep. So they're camped out, and David, he says, all right, hey, one of my guys, come with me. Let's go check this out. So they get to this camp, and if you're the person that's the aggressor, that you're trying to take somebody, you get a little more comfortable. So these guys, they're all camped out, and everybody's just asleep. And it says that God actually caused them to fall into this very deep sleep. So David and his bud, they walk into this camp, and you can just imagine it, right? They're literally amongst people that are trying to kill him, and they're asleep, and he's walking like this. Just step over the body, right? Don't do that one. But they realize after a little while, everybody's just out, 48 hours without sleep, out. They're exhausted. So they go all the way into the middle of the camp where Saul is. And he's got his bodyguards right around him, and they're all asleep. And this is their chance. Finally, we can just end this whole thing, and we can stop being on the run. I'll just read what it says. It says this. So David and Abishai went right into Saul's camp and found him asleep with his spear stuck to the ground beside his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying asleep around him. That's his bodyguard. God has surely handed your enemy over to you this time, Abishai whispered to David. Let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't need to strike twice. That's a pretty confident thing. I'm not going to strike twice. Like, it's done. It's over. This guy's been chasing you forever. But David doesn't do it. He says, no, don't kill him. For who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's anointed one? David and Abishai grabbed the water jug next to him and the spear. And they, again, walk out of the camp to the edge, go up a little hill. And they call out to Saul and his men. They say, hey, y'all are sleeping. You should be ashamed of yourself. You almost let your king die again. Here's a spear. Here's the water jug. And then Saul again stops chasing him for a while. Can you imagine how hard that must have been? I mean, you and I, we've had these moments, right? Where the person that has been saying awful things about you that aren't true, they've been saying that, and all of a sudden you have a moment where you can set the record straight. Don't you want to set the record straight? Or this person that's been saying awful things about you or it's just been not the person you like, and you have a chance to even just gossip about them just a little bit, like you know stuff. You could make this better for you. Do you do it or do you not? You've been bullied or belittled, beaten up. You have that chance at revenge. You want to take it, right? I mean, we've all been there. We've all had a moment like that. Tell me you haven't at least indulged just a little bit. David was different. This is one of the first things that's said about David. It's talking about what kind of person he is. It's actually said to Saul about the future king. It says, but now your kingdom must end. He's talking to Saul. For the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of this people because you have not kept the Lord's command. David is a man after God's own heart. More than anyone or anything, David was in awe of, completely devoted to, utterly and fully passionate about serving God. You feel it when you read his songs that he writes, the Psalms. You feel it inside of those. And to take revenge from someone God had anointed, God had chosen as the leader, was unthinkable, because that would go against God himself. And even when Saul does die in battle, he does. Even when that happens, the respect David gives to him, it's alarming. It's weird. Like, it's crazy that he gives this man who had been chasing him, trying to kill him, the amount of respect that he does. But Saul, he does die. And David does become king. And he immediately has success. He expands and unites the kingdom. Everything is going great. Everybody's thinking in their head, this is what God had in mind. We're finally going to be the nation and the people, this kingdom of people that God had said we were going to be from all the way back in Moses' time or Abraham's time. We're going to do that. It was going so great until David decides not to go out to battle. It says this, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Bad things happen when kings get bored because they should have been out fighting the battle. I mean, let's face it, not just kings, like this is all of us. Nothing good happens when any of us get bored or get too comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, this is just who we are. This is the human condition. But the thing about kings is, even when they do things that they're not supposed to do, they have a way of keeping it secret. Keeping it hush-hush. People don't want to say anything because it's the king. But God has a way of bringing secrets out into the open. There's this one day, a prophet named Nathan shows up in David's chambers. And David's talking to him in the courtyard, wherever it is. And Nathan says, I got a story for you. And he says, there's two men, one rich, one poor. The rich man has all of these flocks of goats and cattle, sheep. And another man, the poor man, has one little sheep. And the poor man, he just loves that little sheep, like to the point where it's a member of the family. That baby sheep, that little sheep, eats off of his plate, spends time with his family. He cuddles it like it's a daughter, loves that sheep. And remember, Nathan is talking to David, who grew up as a shepherd. This is his language. He's speaking his language. And then he says one day, that rich man has some guests arrive, and they want to eat some dinner. So the rich man looks out over all of his flocks and then sees that little sheep that belongs to the poor man, and he says, you know what, let's take that one. Let's take that one. So they go, and they prepare that little sheep that belonged to the poor man and made it for his guests. And Nathan hardly finishes the story before David is furious, angry, upset. How could this man do this? Find this man, bring him here. His head will be on a pole before the end of the day. But Nathan says, that man is you. And it had been. David had taken another man's wife. And when she got pregnant, to cover it up, he sends her husband Uriah out to battle, to the front lines, so that he dies in battle. And then he brings Bathsheba in to become his wife. This was the stain that would tarnish David's legacy. That child would die. David would have another child with Bathsheba. That child's name would be Solomon, who would eventually become the next king. But that decision would set off a chain of events for David. Family infighting and drama. David losing his throne for a while to another one of his sons who chases him and tries to kill him again. David lives in exile again. And then that son, he dies. And so David eventually comes back to being into the king that he was. And he returns to the throne. And in his dying days, he installs Solomon as the next king. Okay. That is a really long story. Can you all take a breath with me? It's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated. I think of that woman and her children and how they were looking up at that hillside wondering who was going to come down that hillside someday. And I think of the joy they must have felt as they saw their father, her husband, return after the 40-day standoff. I imagine the relief. The relief. And I imagine the way that David must have become famous that day. He was a legend, and how their hopes and dreams must have been pinned to him. It's all going to be all right. David's in charge now. It's going to be good. We're going to be all right. But it's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated. And we're all looking for a hero. We're all looking for a king. But our heroes, especially biblical ones, they're still flawed. And I think that's the point. Yes, David was flawed, but God used this flawed, passionate man to do some incredible things. Unite the kingdom, take the land that God had promised to them, give them safety from their enemies, not to mention write a book of songs devoted to God that we still recite today with the Psalms. These are incredible accomplishments, but each and every one of them pale in comparison to the most significant way that God used David. You see, David was like this neon sign flashing in the sky, pointing to a future king. A king who would be called a shepherd like he was. A king who would be born in Bethlehem like he was. A king who would be followed by a ragtag group of followers like he was. A king who would be envied and hated by the local leaders like he was. Except this king was Jesus. The most important thing David did was point to Jesus. There are books upon books detailing the ways that David and Jesus are tied together. We don't have time to go into all that today, but one thing is very clear. David was a key to helping us understand God's plan to bring us Jesus. As a kid, I love the David and Goliath story, right? Like, what kid doesn't want to be the kid with the sling that takes down the giant? It's amazing. But as I've grown up, as I've gotten older, my desires changed. Maybe it's from my growing realization that I'm far from perfect, or that life isn't neat and tidy, it's messy. The thing I want to do with my life, imperfections and all, is to point to Jesus with my life. To represent Jesus the very best I can. I mean, we're all flawed like David. As they say, it's complicated, but David showed us two things. Number one, David showed us that we all have a need and a desire for someone to lead us well. We want that king. We want that legend. We want that hero. We want that person deep in us to tell us how to live our lives, to lead our lives. But the other thing that David showed us was that need and desire that we have inside of us can only be fulfilled by Jesus. I mean, David came as close as anyone to being that kind of leader, but he fell short. Bible stories aren't neat and tidy. They're raw and real and honesty. And it's that rawness and realness that we can trust that God will work through. Like Israel, we all want a king, a leader, someone to show us how to live, but the only one who lives up to that hype is Jesus. The best way to lead others is by following and representing Jesus well yourself. It's to have him as a leader and to point to that leader ourselves. Here's the thing. We can represent Jesus well in spite of our shortcomings. You do that by making Jesus the one that's leading you. You say, hey, Jesus, I'm going to follow your lead. I'm going to live this life how you want me to, the best I'm able. I'm going to make mistakes, but you're the one I'm going to lead to. And not only that, I'm going to follow you, but then you're going to be the one I point to when people say, hey, what's different about you? I'm pointing to you. I'm a signpost flashing in the sky saying, Jesus, it's him. It's not me. It's not me. Because it was always God who was supposed to be our king. Always. Now there's this thing that we're going to do next weekend. It's called baptism. We're going to be out at the conference center. It's going to be beautiful. It's been such an amazing summer of being out there. I don't know if you've been there yet, but if you haven't, get out there. We'll have the service at the same place and then go down by the water and have a special baptism and then a picnic to follow, which the food is always incredible. So be there next weekend. 9:30 is when the service starts. But when you go out into the water, what you're doing is this incredible act. You're saying in front of a whole group of people and to God that you are giving your loyalty and devotion to God. That you know that you're imperfect and you need Jesus' saving grace to change you, to make you new, to transform your life, and that's how you're going to live. Trusting that grace and following him as your leader, as your king. That's what statement you make when you're dipped down in the water and brought back out. It's a political statement because you're saying, God's my king. It's a faith statement. It's a life statement. That's what you're doing. And so if you're interested in that, you can come after the service. I'll be right down here in front, and we can chat about baptism if you're interested in that at all. But here's the thing. David lived this crazy life. On the run, was the king, messed up, kind of came back to God. As we live our lives, here's what we can do. We can be like David in his passion, in his desire to follow God the best that he can. But that only works when we say that Jesus is the leader, because he's the only one who can really lead us well. And then when we live our lives, we can point to Jesus. We can share that with people. We can be honest. Like people ask, like, hey, you guys seem to have like an interesting way of living. It's different than everyone else. Everyone's just chasing all this stuff and you're solid. Why? Well, it's because I follow Jesus. I'm pointing to Jesus. And if you want those things to be true about yourself, to follow Jesus as the leader of your life, maybe saying that for the first time, and to point to him with how you live and how you act with others, would you pray with me? And that's how we'll finish. Dear God, thank you so much for your story of David. It's long, it's crazy, it's all kinds of wild things, but in it we see you working in powerful ways. God, we ask that we would be passionate like David, that we would desire to follow you wherever you lead and however you lead. God, some of us, we've never even said that you're the one we want to lead our life. So right now we say, forgive me for trying to do things my own way. I know you forgive me because of what you've done, Jesus, on the cross. Thank you. But God, now I just want to tell you I want to follow you with my life. I know you're the only true leader that really, really leads well and perfectly. So I'm following you. Thank you for, with that statement, knowing that I will spend eternity with you and I'll live a life of meaning and purpose right now. And God, for those of us who have said that before to you, we ask that you would help us to point to you in the way that we live, that we would live for you in and out of every day, and that we would point to you in the ways that that happens. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes would see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Oh, in awe of you be still. Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I can only imagine when that day comes and I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Oh, in all of you be still. Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Oh, in all you'll be still. Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak it all? I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. only imagine when all I will do is forever worship you. I can only imagine. Nobody fortune, you go